Song for the Imps. How about a song for the Imps? There we go then. Come on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good old sing song, yeah. Okay, yeah, all right. Come on, fellas. Get around the piano. Come on, let's have a good go. Come on, then. Are you ready? Come on, you lot. Go on, then.
Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Ravens is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our...
Cup fever. That's what we're going to be experiencing this week, isn't it? The magic of the cup. And growing up, that was always the opportunity for Lincoln City fans to see, or to hope to see, half-decent teams. I became a Lincoln City fan in 1986. I think the first big team I saw in the cup, 1988-89 season, Southampton. And that was the League Cup. And that was the likes of, Jimmy Case. I can't remember if Letitia played. He might have been a little bit young for that. The Wallaces, Danny Wallace, I think, played in that game. Paul Rideout, who had been at Bari, which was quite a big move at the time. So it was relatively big. And then you think about the other big teams that we played through the 90s, the Premier League teams. So we played Southampton again in 96, League Cup. We played Everton 93-94, League Cup. Played Crystal Palace, FA Cup and League Cup. They were big games for Lincoln. They were big nights at Sinsel Bank, especially when the average attendance was around 3,000. Sinsel Bank could hold, 3 times that. So it was often nice to see, even if it was as few as 5,000 or 6,000 supporters, it felt like an awful lot. I think over the years, the League Cup has been devalued. And look, when I was growing up, it wasn't just Lincoln that I kind of held the League Cup in high regard for. Those who kind of know a little bit of my backstory as a football fan. Sorry, like I was wearing like some sort of top hat. Know my backstory as a football fan know that I also followed for a few years Luton Town, as they were a first division club. Mick Harford played for them. I was told I had to have a big club not to be bullied, so I picked Luton. And the first year I picked Luton, they finished 7th in the first division, and they won what was then the Littlewoods Cup. And I remember watching the Littlewoods Cup final at the time on a little black and white television in my bedroom. I remember Andy Dibble saving a penalty, and yeah, it felt like a pomp and an occasion. It felt like it was just one step down from the FA Cup. Don't forget, this is a time when English clubs weren't in Europe either. So those domestic cup competitions were huge, huge news. The following year, Luton lost to Nottingham Forest, I believe, in the final. And I think then the year after that, Man United beat Forest. I can remember these games because the League Cup mattered. I think by the time we dropped out the Football League in 2011, the League Cup didn't quite hold the same sway. And we'd had some decent nights in the League Cup. Let's not get it wrong. I remember beating Derby at Sinsel Bank. I think it was under Keith Alexander, which was a good night at the Bank. But the League Cup had kind of lost a little bit of its hold. I think with the Champions League, bigger clubs stopped putting sort of big teams out. They started bringing their reserve teams. And when we came back into the Football League, we started putting our reserve team out. And who can forget us, hammering Port Vale at their place to get into the second round, only to draw Blackburn and put our reserve team out at Ewood Park, which was, for me, not gobsmacking, but it just showed where we were in terms of the League Cup. And so that led me to conclude over the last few years that the League Cup was the third most important cup. The EFL Trophy, with all its under-21 teams, gave you an opportunity at least to see young players. At least you knew you were getting the young players from the Premier League. 10 grand for a win, whereas the League Cup brings no prize. For me, it left the EFL Trophy above the League Cup. winning it helped. Going to Wembley, 20-odd thousand Lincoln fans there, that helped. And I always had a soft spot for when it used to be the Autoglass Windscreens Trophy, just because you used to be able to play your younger players, you used to be able to play a bit of a weakened squad, you used to be able to get a look at reserve team players. And anyone that's ever played the likes of Championship Manager or Football Manager knows that giving an opportunity to those fringe players can actually be just as exciting as a run-of-the-mill League Cup, blah, blah, blah. So I got caught up in it, but I also got caught up in the finances of football. And it's easy to, when you try and take the passion out of football and it's a business, and you're looking then at, as I do sometimes at Lincoln City, as what's best for the club in terms of finances, the EFL Trophy is obviously the one to go in. It's obviously the one to progress in. £10,000, I think it is, £10,000 for winning a game, a group stage game against an under-21 team. For me, it just became, the League Cup became a little bit of a sideshow, so to speak. Even when we get a decent draw, Blackburn, we put a reserve team out. It almost feels like, what's the point? Now, maybe I should have titled this differently, because Mark Kennedy has actually reinvigorated my passion for the League Cup, and perhaps some favourable draws, or certainly favourable results, dare I say, has reignited my passion for the League Cup. And if he's watching, and I doubt he is, but my friend Matthew Waugh has also reinvigorated my passion for the League Cup. And it's not just because we've got West Ham tomorrow, which I will talk about in a little bit more detail in a second, but it's easy to take the emotion out of football. It's easy to try, rather, to take the emotion out of football. And a number of times I've had to apologise on one of these videos because I've said something in the heat of the moment after a game that I then, on reflection, think, well, maybe that was a little bit harsh. Maybe I shouldn't have said this, or I shouldn't have said that. But that's passion, that's football, and that's how it should be. You shouldn't make apology for having passion. You should make apology if you never try and look objectively. But sometimes you have to take objectivity out of football. Sometimes you have to take the fact that beating Wolves under 21s on penalties will earn you £5,000. But what does it earn you in terms of memories? The last time we played Wolves under 21s in the EFL Trophy, I turned up at the game, did a football shirt exhibition, and went home before kickoff. That's what the game mattered. Nothing. Would I do the same against West Ham in the League Cup? Of course not. Of course not. So sometimes it's not just about the money. And if you take the money out of it, which competition is the more prestigious? Well, it's obviously the League Cup. It's longer lasting. The Premier League teams actually have to put strongish sides out. I mean, even Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp was at least on the bench. I mean, when they came to our place, I think. Whereas he didn't even bother turning up to Shrewsbury in the FA Cup, for heaven's sake. But at least we are playing West Ham. If anyone says to me, when was the last time you played Manchester City, you'll talk about us playing them in the league and in the League Cup. But some people go, oh, we played their under 21s. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. So what changed my mind about the League Cup? Because financially, probably still a good run in the EFL Trophy is worth more. But first of all, last season, the League Cup run last season, salvaged, by the way, by that late Jordan Garrick goal at Barrow when it looked like we were going out of competition. It can give you a little bit of a boost. And to be fair, up until November time, up until I think we drew Southampton, we were on a decent run, and then we struggled, I think, to win at home after November. But the League Cup can give you a boost. Think back to Everton, when we lost 4-2 against Everton, but that was the year that we I seem to think that was the first year. That wasn't the first year we were back in the Football League. That was the 2019-20 season, I think, wasn't it? That was abandoned early. We beat Huddersfield, but that gave us a real boost. And okay, we changed manager, which kind of took the wind out of the sails a little bit. But those early games, those early exchanges, are really, really impressive, and kind of had supporters coming together, I think, a little bit more. And then last season, there were question marks over Mark Kennedy early last season. Nobody really knew what he was about. Nobody knew what his coaching was going to be about or anything like that. And we had the League Cup run. And the Bristol City win was the big one, wasn't it? Going and beating Bristol City 3-1 at their place. But it was that sort of result that just helps pull a fan base a little bit tighter together. And would we have had the same if we'd got a little bit deeper in the EFL Trophy? Well, we did get to within whisker of what the semi-finals were. We in the quarterfinals last year? Hard to remember, isn't it? Seem to think we lost. Did we go out? Did we beat Morecambe and go out to Accrington? It's, again, you question it, but you don't question the run in the bigger competition. You don't question going to the Dell. And even with the fixture change, even with it being right before Christmas, not being quite accessible to sort of everybody and anybody, it was still a big thing. And I remember the Southampton game. I can't remember. I sworn I watched it, but I can't remember how I would possibly watch it because they're not an iFollow. So I might be wrong. It might just have been some sort of highlights. You kind of remember that game. You remember, the injustice, and that will stay with you because you were playing a proper team, not an under-21 team. So that's how Mark Kennedy helped change the opinion. That's how the competitions helped change my opinion. I've written about this before, but my friend Matt changed my opinion as we left Sheffield United, and look, drawing 0-0 against Sheffield United, on the face of it, was a superb result against a Premier League team, albeit one that are on their arse, but it was a superb result. Winning on penalties, what a night. And as we walked away, Matt commented to me about, it's not all about money, it's not all about pulling 10 grand for a win. Sometimes for football fans, it's about feeling. And actually, all the time for football fans, it's about feeling. When you try and think objectively, it is a business, but it's not a business in the strictest sense. And I still remember, I even remember where we were as we were having the conversation, because we were walking past the gate and we looked in at Bramall Lane, and this huge ground, impressive ground, Bramall Lane. And I remember Matt making a point, and it just struck me. It just struck me how right that is. That football is about moments, it is about the big games. Yes, it's a business, and yes, over the course of a year or something, you wouldn't say, well, we'll take West Ham at home but then go down. That would be ridiculous. We'll take that one moment and then we'll fold. But it's interesting that the season that we last played West Ham, 82-83, was a season where we looked like we were going to run away with things, and financially the club then weren't really on an even keel, and we ended up dropping away when we could have gone to the second division. And we put in a really impressive performance against West Ham, but people still remember the West Ham game fondly. Not the fact that they do remember the fact we tumbled away, but do you know what I mean? People don't instantly think, oh, we played West Ham, and then after that we ended up falling down the table. They weren't connected, but you see the point that I'm making. So I find it really interesting how I'm always willing to, I'm always willing to change my opinion. If somebody says something to me about a situation and I think that they've got a good point, I'm always willing to. I'm not one of these people that has an opinion and my opinion's right. If you can argue your opinion to a better place than where my opinion comes from, then I'll happily change it. And I just think over the course of time, there have been a lot of changes, a lot of points rather made around the League Cup that have changed my opinion on it. And possibly a lot of situations around the EFL trophy that have diminished my opinion of it as well. And whilst this isn't me looking at the EFL trophy on this chat, after winning it and after getting to the semi-final with under Michael Appleton and Remy Howard's missed penalty, after that, I don't know, it just hasn't had the same feel. I went to the Doncaster game last season, we lost 2-1 at home, and it was just like a training game. The Derby game last week, people were coming on afterwards, having a bit of a go about, it feels like a training exercise, because it is, because a lot, how do teams treat that competition? Mark Kennedy says we put a team out to win every single game, but the team that he put out against Derby wasn't the strongest team that he had available to him. So actually, is it the case we put a team out to win the game? Of course we do. You never put a team out to lose. Exeter maybe did, to lose 9-0. But that competition is a trial, isn't it, for clubs? It's an opportunity to get Jay Ben in a Lincoln shirt. It's an opportunity to get minutes into Hakeem Adelakan. It's an opportunity to rest Lass Sorensen and Paudie O'Connor and Ethan Arahan and Ethan Hamilton. And when you look at that, yeah, you're putting a team out to try and win the game. Oh, it's just started raining. Brilliant. But at the same time, you are putting a weakened team out. We don't do that in the League Cup now, and I respect that in Mark Kennedy, because he does give the League Cup the level of respect that I think supporters may have a bit of time for, because we want the big games. You do want those big games. And when you talk about Palace in the Cup, I remember Palace in the Cup, 1-0 win, David Johnson in the first leg, and then in the away leg, late goal, Gary Willard, the referee. What year was it? I have to rack my brains. What was it? Was it 94, 95, 93, 94? And when you start thinking about that, you realize how important the games are, because the games then transcend seasons. They're not part of the season. They're not part of an overall narrative, or rather they are part of an overall narrative, but not in your head. They become these standalone moments as a football fan. I remember West Ham in 82, 83. I was on the railway end. I remember going to Crystal Palace and all that injury time. But you then don't remember the league game after or the league game before particularly. Although I think the league game after West Ham, we beat Bournemouth 9-0. I might be wrong. But again, you see what I mean? They're a standalone moment. And that brings us to today, right now, on the cusp of one of those standalone moments. How we do against West Ham tomorrow won't particularly affect what we've already done this season, won't particularly already affect what we're going to do for the rest of the season. It's for us. It's for you, it's for me, it's for the last few comments, Harry Jackson, it's for James Christopher, it's for Sean Simons, it's for Blake Hutchinson, it's for Michael Vanderson, it's for Dean Wagstaff, it's for us. It's an opportunity for us to go and see our team pit ourselves against one of the best teams in Europe, by the way, because they won a European trophy last season. It's loose, it's a stretch. It's an opportunity to see some international footballers. It's an opportunity to see, David Moyes in the dugout and all that sort of stuff. And when football's as accessible as it is in the modern world, I think that's what makes these games even more special. Back when we played Crystal Palace, for instance, the likes of John Solarco, etc., were big names, but there wasn't quite the same level of access. Now you can turn on Sky Sports News and it's there all the time, and everybody's looking for news around the Premier League and around those top 20 teams. And so the likes of David Moyes, the likes of West Ham United, the likes of the players that they could play tomorrow, they could put in a team, like even Ben Rama and Danny Ings. We've seen them 1,000,001 times. They're household names now. The Premier League is more accessible and more well known by fans across the country than it ever has been. And so that makes this a big game. I could say 20 years ago, if I'd got my nephew 20 years ago, whenever we played Crystal Palace, and I'd gone, we're playing Crystal Palace, he might have looked in his sticker book to find the players. I say to him, we're playing West Ham United, he will instantly start rattling players off who we may face, because they're on FIFA, because he sees them day in, day out, all that sort of stuff. So it's excellent. And that's why it's a standalone moment. And Liverpool was a couple of years ago, lost 7-2, but we couldn't be in the ground. Can you imagine the buzz around the stadium if we'd been in for that? And actually, we used that. Even though the fans weren't there, we used that as a little bit of momentum to keep us pushing on up the league. And you could say that things like the EFL Trophy helped to deplete the squad because of the number of games. And that's another beauty, I suppose, with the League Cup. Actually, you can have your big tie within 2 or 3 games. What is it, 2 games for us this season? You can have your league, you can have your big tie, you can have your big draw. Whereas, if you're in the EFL Trophy and your big game is the semi-final, you've got 3 group games and another 3 knockout games before you get there. That can take time, take energy out the legs. So that's one thing. Actually, if you are successful in the League Cup, it's much quicker. It's much quicker. It's much better in terms of impact on the squad. If we go out, which we likely will, but if we go out to West Ham tomorrow, it's not even the end of September. We've had a cup run, in inverted commas, and there we go. Supporters have got the goodwill, and I think it can be used as a springboard for the rest of the season. And I'm going to say, Mark Evans just put, "You've got a Brawley pal, it's going to rain in a few minutes." Whereabouts are you, Mark? Because it is just beginning to spit now, actually, and I don't want to get soaked. So in terms of using it as a springboard, and it's a little bit of a cliche, but these are the sort of games that help cement a fan base and a manager. And they're the sort of games that help build the connection that many people, I remember saying, had been lost when we came back after COVID. I didn't feel that. A lot of people did. I respect their decision. And I can understand, as that season panned out, that the connection that we had with Dan and Nick, which we'd only really just begun to try and rebuild with Michael Appleton when COVID closed everything down. It was a really hard time. We came back to the ground. There was a lot of disaffection, I think. And to be fair, numbers didn't particularly drop off. But I think it was tough then for Michael. If Michael had kind of been if we'd been in the stadium when we'd got Liverpool, would it have been a little bit different? I don't know. But I know one thing, Mark Kennedy will be able to leverage this a little better than Michael did. Because whatever the outcome tomorrow, let's say we put up a brave fight and we lose 4-1. or 4-2, like we did against Everton. We lost 4-2 against Everton. Standing ovation. We got a goal or two. We got two, obviously. But if you get a goal, something like that, celebrate against a Premier League team, you go out bravely. Mark Kennedy will leverage that. He'll be over. The players will be over. There'll be applause. There'll be songs. They're the sort of moments that help galvanise a fan base. And you think back to, I mean, it's a different competition, granted. You think back to Dan and Nicky when with the FA Cup run, everything started against Oldham. Up until that point, we'd lost to, and my timeline might be a little bit mashed now. I think we'd lost to Dover, we'd lost at home to Sutton, and we were celebrating 4,000 fans against Solihull Moors. The Oldham game came along, and they used that. That was a catalyst for everything that went on to that season. Not just finances. Finances helped, but it was a catalyst for everything, for the success that followed. And I think Mark's got the sort of personality that can link onto that. My hope for tomorrow is that we just don't get humbled. It's all right being beaten 7-2 at home by champions of the England, Liverpool. But is it all right to do that against West Ham, a team that don't particularly like to have the ball, a team that will maybe struggle a little more to break us down? I mean, I remember watching them in the FA Cup 2 years ago against, I want to say Kidderminster, but I might be wrong, where they needed a last-minute goal to level. I think then a last-minute goal to win as well, if I remember correctly, in extra time. You know, they really struggled to break them down. Jared Bowen, I think, got it. So I'd love to see something like that. And you know what? If we go out, if it's 1-1 going into 80 minutes and then we can see 2 late on, as we did against Southampton in '96, or if it's like the Everton game where you take an early lead and then you're fighting really hard and you think you might stay in it and then you're bravely beaten at the end, I can take that and I can see that happening. I can see that happening because one thing we are is resolute and we're hard to beat. We're hard to break down. Portsmouth are top of the table. They're 2 shots on target on Saturday. As long as we cut out these silly individual errors, which, to be fair, are all that's cost us this season. We haven't been well beaten by anybody this season, apart from Bolton. But even that was individual errors. But we haven't been, the games that we've either drawn or lost, aside from Bolton, have been as much of our own doing as they have the opposition's doing. Even Derby playing against a weakened Lincoln team a couple of weeks ago didn't tear us apart. We're organised, we're disciplined, we're good out of possession. Sounds a lot like when we went to Burnley, doesn't it, in 2017? And Burnley were a team who underestimated us slightly, played a slightly weakened side, and struggled to pick us apart. The best version of Lincoln City turns up, even without strikers, and I've gone 22 minutes without mentioning that, by the way. But if the best version of Lincoln City turns up tomorrow night, and a poor version of West Ham turns up, bear in mind, beaten at the weekend, playing again on Saturday, so they're not going to be wanting to put a full first team out when they play, I think, Sheffield United on Saturday as well, which is a big opportunity for them to get some points on the board, given how United played this weekend. Then we've got a chance. Do I think we'll make an upset? Do I think we'll create an upset? No. But do I think the possibility exists? Yes. And if you'd asked me before we played Liverpool a couple of years ago, do I think we'll get anything from the game? It would have been a resounding no. The same when we went to Arsenal. But that isn't one of those games. It's just this little middle game. It's just this little kind of, it sits just in between the cold, harsh reality of the difference between the two teams and hope. Here's the story for you. Just while the rain just starts coming down, Mark was right. Here's the story for you. Akiba Delican to get the winner. Because that's exactly the type of story that the papers would love. And from a Lincoln City point of view, it would be the perfect story for us, again, to leverage for a few more supporters, to get a few more column inches in the papers. Because Hacks was on West Ham's books as a youngster. He's got form in the Cup, by the way, coming on and scoring late for Gillingham last year to put them through in the FA Cup last-minute goal, or 90 plus 5 it was. I just wonder. But then I'm one for stories, and they don't often occur. Like when I thought that Mike Clapton was going to get Oxford in the playoffs, didn't. I thought he was going to get Oxford in the FL Trophy, didn't. Thought that that was going to be a thing, wasn't. But those stories exist, and one day, one of those stories will be written about Sincil Bank. All I'm thankful for is that we're not one of the teams that just went out with a whimper in the first round. So at least we've got a little bit of something to talk about early in the season as well. So it won't detract from the focus come November, December, unless, of course, we win the game. You just never know. Before the rain comes down, let's just get some of your comments. Dean Wagstaff, morning, Gary. Well done on your run, mate. Thank you very much, Dean. I appreciate that. Michael Banderson, how do you think West Ham will... What team do you think West Ham will put out against us, considering they're in the European Cup and they would want to rest their good players? I think it'll be a weakened team. I think they're in the Europa League, aren't they? PSV coming up? No, that's one of the others. That's one of the other teams. Can't remember who. Good morning from Blake. Morning from Sean. Phil says, slightly off topic, but have Lincoln bin Tyler Walker? No, mate, he's out for 8 weeks injured. One of 3 strikers on our books, all injured. James Christopher, EFL Trophy is a different beast. Yeah, it was great when we won it, but that's done. And now, as you say, the League Cup's different. We want the big teams at home under the lights, or a huge trip to Old Trafford or Anfield as a one-off for the fans and exposure. You don't get that in the EFL Trophy bar in the final. I'll drink to that. And as I say, I've happily changed my mind on the situation. It's been happening over a period of time. Yep, I'm wrong. Keep the League Cup. Harry Jackson, morning, Gary. I think when facing a team in a higher league, part of the excitement surrounding such games is the possibility of beating said team. I'm looking forward to watching the West Ham game. We could win or lose. It's one of the uncertainties in football. Spot on, Harry. Rain's coming down heavy now. Steve Barton says, morning, Gary. I totally agree with you. He's put then, great night tomorrow, but out of the next 2 games, Saturday result is most important. Interesting. I probably tend to agree. But at the same time, if you beat West Ham and you don't beat Cheltenham, it's the West Ham one that everyone will remember. If you lose to West Ham and beat Cheltenham, the Cheltenham game probably won't get remembered. Morning, dude. First full stadium since Everton, says Mr. Ward. Very possibly. Mark says in Lincoln, pal, Thunder and Lightning as well. Get home quick. I am literally, that's my car there. So I'm almost there, chaps and chapesses. Nick says, sorry, we've got Gav, morning, Gaz. Whatever happens tomorrow night will be an amazing occasion. Atmosphere, yes, it will. Nick says, think we will set up not to concede and try to get pens again. Sound. Kev says, morning, Green, Kev Green, sorry, says, morning, guys, keeping the dream alive. Indeed. And Michael V. Spanderson says, I think Carabao Cup would be so much better if it's just teams in the Championship down. Absolutely not. Get those Premier League teams in it. Let's have the big games. I'm going to run home now and dry off because it's hammering it down. All I want to say is enjoy tomorrow, win, lose, or draw. It's a great opportunity for the club. It could be a great few days with Cheltenham coming to Sinsel Bank as well. It's an opportunity for 3 points. It's just going to be a big week. And it's just nice to feel energised and passionate about the football club, even though we've got 3 strikers out, even though we've taken a little bit of a knock in recent weeks. We're still in a really good place. Enjoy the game. Up the Imps.